What's up YouTube? Welcome again to my channel. My name is Romulo, and in today's video I'm going to talk about how I got my first guest into my podcast with a 0 rejection rate. So stay tuned and let's go to the video. So for those that are new to the channel, welcome. And in my channel, I got a bunch of stuff, but this series specifically is about how I started my podcast. I think it's interesting to get to know a point of view from a beginner. So if you're interested on launching your podcast, I think this channel will help you a lot. Just to give you guys a little bit of background, about 6 months ago, I decided to start a podcast just because I was bored at home during lockdown, and also because it was something that I wanted to do before. So I had the idea of starting an entrepreneurship podcast, but then the complications that came to my mind, the first one was how I would find people to come to my podcast that has 0 listeners. So about the same time, like March or April, one of my favorite entrepreneurs called Gary Vaynerchuk, or Gary V, also decided to start a new show in his YouTube channel, which is called Tea with Gary V. And I just loved it so much. Every single day I would turn on and watch it live. For those that are not familiar with it, this show is simply random people, like his followers or so, that send questions to his team, and then his team filters down the most interesting ones, and then they come into the show in a conference call with Gary V to ask that question. And then they have a chat of about 10 minutes. And there are so many interesting people with amazing questions. Some of the questions that I also had, so I could resonate a lot with it, you know? And then at some point it just clicked to me, like, wow, so these people that are going to his show have very interesting questions, they are interesting people, and the show actually shows their contact there. So I said, you know, maybe I could bring those people to come to my podcast as at least the first guest, because I had absolutely no idea where I would find people to come to my podcast. So I think I watched maybe 15 episodes or so, and I got 5 or 6 very interesting people. It's amazing because they give a little bit of context, a little bit of their own background. So I could see if they would be a good fit to my podcast prior even to researching more about them. So then I took notes. All the time there was an interesting person in the show, I would take notes of the name of the person, their contact, like Instagram or email, and the day of the show, so that maybe after a few weeks that I could re-watch these episodes to remind myself of these people's stories. So put it aside a little bit. And another guy that I watched a lot is called Flynn from Smart Passive Income. Definitely recommend his channel. He goes a little bit deeper into how to set up your podcast. One of the episodes he talks about how to invite guests, and what he says there is that you should first approach the person, talk a little bit about it, get to know the feeling, if you have a good conversation or if their story is interesting, basically if they're a good fit to your podcast. And then once you make sure that that is what you're looking for, you just pitch the idea of your podcast and invite them to be part of it. So you probably have already set your podcast email account, and then you can message this person professionally using that account. In that email, you talk a little bit about the idea of the podcast, the perfect listener or the avatar of the podcast. In my case, it was a person of about 28 to 30 years old that would live in a big city, would commute to work every day for like an hour or so, and would listen to podcasts during that time. And these people would have a lot of doubts in mind about their future. They are probably working in a 9-to-5 job in the corporate world, and they're just tired of it. They want to start their own business, but they are too afraid to make the leap towards it. Then you list the topics that you would like to talk about in the podcast, but in a very general idea, just an overview. Like I would talk a little bit about your biography, I would talk a little bit about your first job, your first 9-to-5, when you decided to quit the 9-to-5 to start your own business, if you have started it prior to quitting your 9-to-5 or not, and how the things are going at the moment. And at the end, and this is really important, you set up 2 or 3 specific dates that are good for you to offer to that person for the day of the interview. And don't forget to consider the time zone. The thing is that it's really important, because if you just make it open for the person, probably they would choose a day that is not good for you, for example, And then it's kind of weird when you're talking to that person and saying, I'm sorry, but I can't do that day. Can you do that this other day? And then this person, this day is not good for me. You just have to make sure that the day that you suggest to your guest will be a date that you will be available. And that's it. You send the email, wait for their answer, and maybe you have a set date. So to summarize, you start the email with the idea or the description of your podcast. Then you put the avatar or the ideal listener. Then you put an overview of the topics that you want to cover in that interview specifically, and then a few options for the interview date and time. So of course this is what worked for me, and I have a general idea of what I will do next, because this show, Tea with Gary Vee, will not last forever, and I don't think it will be a limited resource of guests to my podcast. So following also some suggestion from Pat Flynn, he just says like, you have to be part of a community. It's also what Gary Vee says. Be part of a community, go on a Facebook group, engage with people on Instagram, on Twitter, on whatever platform you would like. And there you can find like-minded people and possibly in the niche that you are going to do your podcast as well. From them, as I said, if you find somebody interesting, message them, have a chit chat. If everything works well, ask for their email, send the email in the standard that I just told you, and I can guarantee you that you will have a 0 rejection rate as well. So that's it for the video. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you like it, give the thumbs up. And if you're interested about podcasting, watch my other videos in this playlist that I document my journey on podcasting. And stay tuned for the next one. Thank you and goodbye.